In today's video, we'll begin by preparing Distress Oxide backgrounds in a variety of colors. I'll start with Wilted Violet and Faded Jeans by rubbing the ink directly on a craft mat and then wetting it by spritzing it with some water from a water bottle. You can play around with how much water you add to the ink that's on the craft mat. When you spray it, you'll see the ink activate, and it gets more diluted the more water that you add. Once you have some droplets of ink activated with water, simply start pressing a white piece of cardstock to the puddles of ink. You'll see that some of the ink begins to blend and some of it puddles, and what we're going to do is heat it with a heat gun to help speed the drying process. This is a layering technique, so once you have the cardstock relatively dry, flip it over and add some more ink to it by pressing it against the craft mat. I like to rotate the cardstock as I apply it to the ink so that there's all sorts of texture around the piece of paper. Use your heat gun again to speed the drying process and continue to repeat this until you've got lots of layers on there and you're happy with the results. You can go 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, as many times as it takes to get it to the result that you want. The great thing is there's really no wrong way to do this, and each piece is unique every time you do it. Now I'm going to move on to a different set of colors. I'm using Distress Oxide ink again, but this time I'm rubbing Broken China and Cracked Pistachio onto the craft mat. This time I'm using a little bit less color. I think that you should try using more color or less color with different parts of the project just to see what variations you can come up with. Again, I'll spray it with some plain water and I'll just start dabbing my white piece of cardstock into the ink. The cardstock is cut to be approximately 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches because we're going to cut it later using a die. I really like the little speckles of color that are developing on the piece of cardstock here, so I'm really going to try to keep that as I move forward on the layering. I'll now switch to another set of Distress Oxide colors. This time I'm rubbing Spiced Marmalade and some fossilized amber onto the craft mat to create a golden background. Spritz it with some water, and again dab your cardstock in. Same technique. For comparison, this time I'm adding a lot of water, and you're going to see when I dab the cardstock into this puddle, it's going to be very diluted and really fill in the whole surface, rather than making those little speckles of color like I did before. Both effects are really cool. I'll just use both of them in different layers to create the look I want. I'm going to add another layer and continue layering until I get to the exact look I want with this golden color. This is a really easy to learn technique, especially if you're using colors that are right next to each other on the color wheel, like yellow and orange. Now the last combo I'm going to use for my backgrounds is Peeled Paint and Fossilized Amber. This is skewing a little bit more green, and I love how it turned out. I'm going to try using a little less color this time with a medium amount of water, and I'm going to see if I can get some of those speckles to show up again on my white background. As you can see, there's more water in the green portion and less in the yellow portion, so when I flip it over, there's a lot of yellow speckles and the green has run all over the place. Just keep this in mind as you're planning out how to layer things up and how much water and ink to use. It's perfectly fine to leave some white cardstock uninked. I think that adds a little bit of interest, but I'm filling in most of the cardstock as best I can. Now that we have our Distress Oxide backgrounds all ready to go for the project, it's time to start assembling and die cutting. I'm going to use the scallop stitched fancy frames, and I'm using the very largest frame that comes in the set. The first step is to cut a thin outer frame from a plain piece of white cardstock. We just need that outer border to use with our backgrounds. Now make sure that your Distress Oxide backgrounds are dry before going on to this next step. You're going to put that frame over the Distress Oxide background and run it through your die cut machine. This will cut the perfect size rectangle to fit inside that white frame. I'm going to use a tape gun to apply adhesive along the edge of my card. I'm going to go around all 4 edges, right along the side, and then I'm going to put a second strip just inside that. I want to put plenty of adhesive down so that things stay nice and flat. Now if you apply the adhesive this way, that thin outer frame will hit the adhesive just right, so that it stays attached to the card and leaves a little bit of room right near the edge so that you can put that rectangle down and it'll fit nicely inside that frame. I like to start at an edge or a corner and carefully butt that up against the frame and then slowly roll it across the card to fill in the space. Then I just use my fingers to tap things down. I'll be using the Thought Cloud for the background. This die is very versatile. I use it for lots of different sentiments. It's got a little cloud and two little bubbles that come off to the side, just like a little word balloon. I'm going to cut that out of white cardstock, and then I'll be stamping and adding a die cut to it. The Perky Wishing You die is one of several word dies that we designed to go along with our clear word stamp sets. I'm going to cut Wishing You out of some purple cardstock. It doesn't need to match the wilted violet color exactly because the background already has lots of different purples and blues. Now here's the word set, Wishing You, and you can see several phrases that go with that die. I'm going to use a happy birthday, so that Wishing You in the die and then a happy birthday in the clear stamp set goes together on top of the cloud. I'm positioning everything in my MISTI so that it's easier to stamp, just kind of giving an idea of where the Wishing You is going to be, and positioning the clear stamp just right. I'll pick that up with the cover of the MISTI, and then I'm going to use Distress Oxide in Wilted Violet to ink up that clear stamp. I'll show you here. I'm trying to keep things nice and close so that lots of detail shows up. So I'll just ink it lightly, and then I'm going to flip that back over and I'll stamp it right down onto the cloud. Now I wasn't completely happy with how that happy birthday stamped out, so I'm going to add another layer of ink on there. And that's the great thing about the MISTI. Ink up your stamp again, close it again, it stamps in exactly the same place and makes that image just a little bit stronger so you get a real crisp look. I've decided to use some detailed craft glue today to adhere all my pieces together. I'm just using the tip of the bottle to apply some glue here and there, maybe every 1/4 inch or so, onto each little piece of die cut. And then when I press it down, there might be a little bit that squishes out, but it dries clear, so it's not a problem. Now there is a little bit of detail work to do here. When you die cut Wishing You, there's 2 little dots for the eyes in Wishing, and you need to keep track of those because you need to glue those on later. I just use my needle tool to position those back over the eyes. It doesn't take too much time. You just have to kind of hold your breath and put it on the right spot. I want to give the card a little bit of dimension, and I think that'll be perfect on the cloud. So I'm going to use a few pieces of foam mounting tape on the back just to make things pop up just a little bit. It doesn't take much. You don't have to put it everywhere. So I'm just putting 3 pieces on there. I'll just pull off the liner, and then I'll position that onto the card. Now you'll notice that my color scheme is pretty monochromatic. It's really just shades of purple. White frame, white cloud, and then all the color that I'm using is on that background, the word dies, and the clear stamp, and those all coordinate together. All that's left to do is to finish adding the word bubbles there, and you've got a great card with a beautiful inked background. Now this is a great composition that you can do in a bunch of different formats and colors. So I'm going to repeat the process using the Perky Happy Birthday die. This die was designed to go with the Birthday Sentiments clear stamp set. You can see a number of phrases on there that's going to go with the phrase Happy Birthday. I've chosen Wishing You A, and then it's going to go with Happy Birthday. So simply just get it lined up in the MISTI, and you're going to use Distress Oxide in peeled paint to ink that stamp. I'm using this because it's going to match with the inks that we used in the distressed background that we made earlier. Now there were a few parts that didn't stamp out so perfect, so I decided I'm going to stamp it twice just to make sure that I have a nice clean stamped image on there. I could have just used the clear stamp set here. The Birthday Sentiments could put a whole phrase on that cloud, but I love the different look between the stamped image and the word dies. I think that there's different proportions and there's some texture going on there that make it really interesting. After your sentiment has been stamped, you're going to adhere the word dies down. Depending on how you choose these sentiments, sometimes they're going to be at the top, sometimes they'll be at the bottom. The thought cloud is actually going to be large enough and open enough to accommodate any combination you're going to make between the word dies and the clear stamp set. So I already die cut another one of the Distress Oxide backgrounds that I did, and I have the frame and the front of the card all in place. All I have to do is add the thought cloud and the word bubbles onto the card and I'm done. Now here's a great example of a color change and a different configuration of the die and word stamp set. I'm just using the word birthday this time so that it says, "Hope you have a terrific birthday." I'm going to ink it in fossilized amber because that's one of the ink colors that we used on the background that we made earlier, so that'll go perfectly with it. So here I'm using the same word die and the same clear stamp set, but it's creating a completely different card with a completely different color scheme. And it still looks nicely proportioned on the thought cloud. Now the last combination is one of my favorites. It's the Beautiful Day word die and the Beautiful Day clear stamp set. It's the same basic composition that we've been doing for the other color cards. This time we're going to be using blue, so I'm going to stamp that in Distress Oxide Broken China. This is such a versatile composition for a greeting card. Just change up the colors. Backgrounds are really easy to do. The clear stamps and the word dies work great with each other. I think it's a great color concept idea that you can have a lot of fun with. I can't wait to show you what a difference color makes on this next project. We're going to begin by die cutting with the Floral Fantasy frame. The frame is the size of a full-size card, so you'll need a piece of off-white cardstock larger than 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 to cut it. Cut it out, you'll see there's lots of detail on this die. We're going to be using all that detail to serve as negative space for a background that we're going to make. I'm sponging the front of a white A2 size note card here with Distress Oxide and Worn Lipstick. I'm going to put some on each edge, and then I'm going to switch to Distress Oxide in Spiced Marmalade. Make sure that you're overlapping. You want those colors to blend so that orange on top of pink makes a little bit of a different color. And then I'm going to use plain old Distress ink and Squeezed Lemonade. I like that bright yellow, so I wanted some of that in there. Next, I'm going to switch to Distress Oxide ink in Broken China. Again, make sure you're overlapping. When you put that on top of the yellow, you get a little green. When you put it on top of the Worn Lipstick, you get a little bit of a violet color. And I'll finish by filling around the border with Distress Oxide ink in Wilted Violet. I'm going to be a little careful. This color can tend to take over, so I'm putting just a little bit here and a little bit there. And then I decided maybe I wanted a little bit more of that spiced marmalade back in there, so I added a few touches here and there. I put some over the purple and a little bit over the green, just filling any white spaces in, just so that color was nice and strong. I took my frame, put it on top just to see if there's any areas of color that weren't filled in, because anywhere there's those flowers, we need to make sure that there's some color in there. I realized there was an area on the left where the orange and the purple had made sort of a brown, so I just took some more purple and went over it. The great thing about these Distress Oxide inks is they're slightly opaque, so I'm putting another layer on there, and whatever I'm putting on top is what's going to show up. Once you're satisfied with color, go ahead and put glue on the back of the frame, just a dot every 1/2 inch or so all around the frame, and then line it up with the edges of the card. We need to fill the inside in now. That's going to mask off everything on the inside, and we'll use that as the area where we're going to put our sentiment. So I've saved that center piece of the die cut. This is some part that you probably would normally throw out, but we're going to use it to mask off that middle so that only the color shows around the edge. You just need to fit it in like a puzzle piece to the center. We'll use the Perky Thank You die for the word die for this particular card. It matches with the Thank You Sentiments clear stamp set. I'll use one of the phrases out of it. This is the one that says, "For making me smile." So I've got the thank you dies sort of in place to give me an idea of where I want to stamp. I've put it in my MISTI. I'm going to stamp it with Distress Oxide and Vintage Photo to match the brown cardstock that I'm using for the thank you die. Now I like to use this layout quite a bit. I've designed a bunch of frame dies where I can use the negative space in the middle to put my sentiment on, and then the outside is just a place where I can have fun applying color. I've chosen a bright rainbow color scheme here, but really you could choose anything you wanted. Colors that are close to each other will give you a more monochromatic look, but go ahead and explore and have some fun. Now here's an example of a similar color scheme, but a dramatically different look. I've die cut the Floral Fantasy frame out of black cardstock this time. This is going to give a much more contrasted look with this rainbow background. Now I've changed the color scheme slightly. I added squeezed lemon and cracked pistachio to the mix, and I've done smaller little areas of color so that there's more color to blend around the edge. And you'll see now what a difference the black makes. Such a different look from the cream color in the center before. Just like before, you're going to add some adhesive in the middle so that centerpiece gets filled in with a dramatic dark background, and you'll add your sentiments right on top of it. For our last project, we're going to use the Chrysanthemum border to cut edges on each side of our card. It's a similar concept to the Fantasy Floral frame. We'll be seeing color through the cutout areas. We're going to line up the Chrysanthemum border just along the right side edge of the card, about an 1/8 inch, a little less than an 1/8 inch or so from the edge. And then you'll flip it after it's done cutting and do the same thing on the left side. So you end up with 2 pieces, and you can save those for another project. What we want to keep is that middle piece. And then we're going to go ahead and cut some other pieces in a darker color blue out of cardstock, and we'll use those for our outlines. Now on a plain white A2 size note card, I'm going to begin applying different shades of Distress Oxide ink. I'm starting with Wilted Violet. I'm going to put some here and some there. Doesn't matter exactly where you put it because we're going to be layering lots of different colors here. The next color is Broken China. Now we just need to go along the edges. You don't have to worry about the center quite so much. Just overlap. You want to create new colors as you go. And I want to put a lot of thick color on there. Distress Oxide comes out pretty thick anyways, but it just helps if you add a little bit of extra pressure and really rub those different colors together. I'm going to finish with Distress Oxide and Cracked Pistachio. This is my lightest color, so I'm going to use it as my blender shade. When it goes over the Broken China, it's going to lighten that. When it goes over the Wilted Violet, it'll lighten that. It's creating new colors as I go. I want to fill in all the edges so there's plenty of color around each border. Apply glue to the back of that dark blue die-cut cardstock and put that chrysanthemum border right along the left side edge. Gently push everything in place, and then start applying glue in all the little nooks and crannies in between that die cut. You need to get around the petals and all those little stems in there so that when we put that centerpiece on, it's going to lay nice and flat next to that die cut. I'm going to put some extra glue right along the edges of that centerpiece also to make sure that things are flat and flush when you apply it to the card. So you'll see when you assemble this card that if you start by gluing the left side and then you glue the middle down and then you finish with the right side, any overhang that you have off the edge of the right side of the card can just be trimmed off. You want to go left to right because it's easier to trim the right side, the side that you open on the card. Now you'll just take that second chrysanthemum border that you die cut in dark blue cardstock and you'll add some adhesive and fit it along the right edge, and anything extra that's hanging over will be trimmed off. I'm going to use the Prayers Sentiments word set along with the Perky Prayers die to create the sentiment on the front of this card. I've cut the Perky Prayers die out of a dark teal cardstock, and I've put the phrase "sending you hugs and" above the prayers die so that when I stamp it, it says "sending you hugs and prayers." I'm going to use Faded Jeans, just another shade of blue that'll work nice with all those blues, purples, and greens on there. And I'll apply a little bit of adhesive to the back of the Prayers die and put it in place, lining it up so that it's nice and straight. I chose a combination of colors here that were right next to each other on the color wheel, and I love how it turned out. And I wanted to show you one more color change. This time, same composition, but we're going to use pink and yellows to create a warm, sunny looking card. Since my color scheme was a little more rosy and golden, I'm using an off-white cardstock in the middle for my neutral, and then I'm going to border it with some yellow colored cardstock. Same idea. This time I'm going to use the Beautiful Day clear stamp set and Beautiful Day dies to work together to create yet another greeting. I could have stamped using a pink shade of ink, but I decided to use just plain old black for a nice crisp look. I hope you've enjoyed today's video as I showed you different color options using these versatile stamp and die combos. Until next time.